No matter where you put it, red always stands to stop.
My name is Dennis Hafey, and I'm the main tinsmith for the Statue of Liberty. This is my family business here. And this is our 114th year in business. Now, I've also been told that I'm the only person who's ever slept in the crown overnight, which is not something I'd like to do very often. I had to work all night. I had to repair the windows in the crown, and basically, you're up so far, you have to make a decision whether you're going to stay up there or not. And at that time, I could only work in there after the crowds were gone, which was after 6 p.m. in the evening. And the last boat that leaves is at 10 o'clock. So I'd have to stop working and get everything packed away by 9:15. And essentially I wasn't getting anything done, so I had to stay up there. And when I was tired enough, I just put my bedroll down and went to sleep. But the statue in the wind and the rain moves quite a bit. So it was moving about 3 inches. That's a little unnerving when you're trying to sleep. But as I'm laying there, I'm looking up at the curls in her hair and realizing that I'm only a penny and a half thickness away from the outside. The skin of the statue is only about a penny and a half in thickness. Now, normally, when you make a statue, when you build a statue, you carve something out of stone or wood, and it sort of fights back at you because it's a solid object and you're taking things away from it. Obviously, the big difference here, I mean, outside of the idea that it's massive, is that it's hollow. So they had to determine what every single component of that statue was going to look like before they put it together. So if I wanted to make a statue of you, I would make molds of different parts of you, your fingers, your hands, your eyes, your ears, your nose, and then I would take all those parts and I'd put them together and I'd have a statue of you, but it would be in your height. Now, I already have a statue of you in your height. What if I wanted to make a statue of you that was 151 feet and 1 inch? Well, I'd have to determine out how big that finger was going to be. If you were 151 feet and 1 inch, this is how big the front section of your index finger would be. This is the front section of an 8-foot long finger. This is the index finger of the hand that holds on to the torch. Now, I made this out of foam, but I wanted to make it look like plaster. Now, I did that because initially all of the pieces of the statue were built in actual size in plaster. Now, I never assembled them in plaster, but all the components were all over the shop. In one section you'd have the foot, one the face or the ear or the tablets that she was holding on to, and they were in actual size. Now they used these to form the metal, but let alone is this fragile, because this is just foam. If this were plaster, it would be that much more fragile. Now, I can't form the metal around this because it would smash it. But they did use these for that purpose. But these were really only the first phase of the project. What they used these for was to make these. This is a repoussé form. This is the opposite of that. That was made just to make this. And this took me 9 hours to make, and if I do say so myself, I'm pretty good at this. And also, I have a screw gun. You can see the screws here. And I have a nail gun. And all these pieces were glued together. 9 hours to make. Where you see screws here, they would have put pegs in. Wooden pegs. Wet wooden pegs that would dry and expand into the spots. Now the reason that it takes so long is simply this. You start out with your mold, the finger, in this instance. You put a piece of wood here. Then you put a piece of wood here to mark that point. You mark this one. You cut it. And then you bind it to this one. So I can't make this piece until I make this piece. And therefore I can't make this piece until I make this piece. And all the way across and all the way back. Now, repoussé. Now, I'm not too good at French. I'm not too good at English, for that matter, but I was calling this repose when it started. Apparently repose is what you do after you're finished with the job. This is repoussé, which means to push. Now, when they started out, they were using a metal much thicker than this, probably about 5 times thicker than this, 3/32 of an inch, and of course about 1.5 pennies in thickness. Now, they would lay it on top of the form, and they would heat it with essentially kerosene torches. Now, these torches weren't clean. They didn't burn all of their kerosene because they were essentially hand pumped. Now, they would heat up this metal. It would have soot on it, it would have kerosene on it, but they would take it and heat it up so it got soft, and then they would push it in to the form. Then they would take the wooden mallets, which of course I made myself, and they also made theirs themselves, and they would start to hammer it into the form. Now remember, there's only one of me. There are probably 40 or 50 of these guys doing the same thing at the same time, so it gets a little noisy. And you just work it in. And you would also think by beating up this metal, by beating up this metal, that you'd make it weaker. But it actually sort of has the opposite effect to it. If you get real close to the statue, you'd see the dents are still there. Well, they want the dents to be there because the dents actually make it stronger. Each dent becomes sort of like a separate piece of metal sort of fighting against the other pieces. But also, by hammering it, we've done what they call an annealing. So essentially, we've taken and we've compressed it so the molecules are closer together, which makes it more brittle. Now also, the statue comes here, it's in 350 pieces. But you look at this and you have to realize there are a lot more than 350 pieces in that statue. Well, the pieces that came here were more along the lines of the foot, or the face, or the ear, or the tablet. And those were a bunch of smaller pieces put together to make those larger pieces. Now, when they put them together, they didn't want you to see the seams in them. They essentially couldn't lay them over each other because you'd be able to see that seam. They essentially sort of butt them up against each other. But not only that, if you get real close to the face, you'll see that there's a little tiny seam right here. And it's not straight, it's jagged. They dovetailed the pieces together so they would lock into each other. But in between that seam, you'll also see essentially the glue that holds it together. Now, it's not a normal glue. It's a very, very, very solid glue, but you have to heat it up to about 450 degrees before it turns into a liquid. And that is simply this. This is solder. It's half lead and half tin. Now, the technology on this hasn't changed much in thousands of years. If you go to Rome, you go to the aqueducts, they essentially sealed the seams on the aqueduct with lead, and they just poured it in by heating it in a little cauldron like this and just pouring it in, and it worked very nicely. Now, when I was a little boy, I was 11 years old, I started in the shop, and this is the unit that we used. This is pretty high-tech for 2,000 years ago. And it's exquisitely ugly because, you know, it works out very well for me because no one's going to steal it. I've left it on the job a number of times and I've come back and it's still been there. People would probably look at it and go, oh, well, whatever. But no electrical hookup, no gas hookup. You just bring a bag of coal. Now, what it does is it heats these up to about 500 degrees. Now, remember, you only want it at 450. But you heat it up to 500, so you work your way back down, and then when it gets below 450, you put it back into the oven, and you pull out the other one, and you keep rotating like that. Now, 11 years old, and I'm told that I'm supposed to hold on to this with one hand. Well, the old men in the shop were having a riot with me. I was the boss's son, and they were essentially babysitting for me. But it was a little frightening. I'm looking at this thing, and it's 500 degrees, it's massive, this long handle. Told that I have to hold on to it with one hand. Well, I can do it now, but it was difficult then. Now, I had to hold on to it with one hand because I had to hold on to the solder with the other hand, and that's how I would melt it onto the seam. Now, high-tech, again high-tech for 2,000 years ago. This has this material here, low-grade brass, in this size, has been worked out over the years that it holds the heat in the body long enough to work about 18 inches of the seam. Now, this is this length for a reason. It's also wood because it insulates your hand from the heat. Now, normally I would grab this and it would just fall out of the table because I can't hold on to it like this. But I learned eventually that I was supposed to hold it like this and let this fall right here. And so all the weight is distributed along my arm. It's a very, very simple tool. Now, I show you these because it gives you sort of a window to the past. When I grew up, the window to the past was every day walking into the shop. There were things hanging on the wall that hadn't been moved in 80 years, and I wasn't going to move them. But it also gives you a window to the time that they were building the statue, because if you look at the pictures of when they built the statue, there would be units like this laying around. This is how they heated their irons also, with coal. Now, also, remember what I told you. The statue comes here, 350 separate pieces, a boatload of happy Frenchmen with this beautiful gift for us. But apparently they didn't have a satellite hookup on their boat, and they didn't realize that the Americans had not come through with their end of the deal. The French would build the statue, this beautiful statue, and the Americans would build the pedestal that it would set on. We have a great picture of that boat docked on the side of this island with nothing behind it. Now, this embarrassed a lot of people, and some very important and powerful people. And one of them was Joseph Pulitzer. Now, Joseph Pulitzer was a publisher back in the 1880s. He didn't come from wealth, but he was a very wealthy man, and he made his money selling newspapers. So he decides that he's going to get the funding for this pedestal. He's going to put an ad in his paper, basically asking common people for the money. And his hook was that no matter what amount of money you send in, he would put your name in the paper. So you had a choice here. You could send in $10,000 or you could send in a penny. Well, most people sent in pennies. But a penny was worth a lot more than it is now. It works out to be quite a bit of money as compared to a penny, but people were making 35 cents a day, skilled labor. So a penny was a bit of a commitment. But also, he did get a better hook than he expected. Because what happened was, you had large families, 12 children, and they would send in 12 separate pennies in separate envelopes for each name. So now, what Pulitzer has is he has a newspaper filled with thousands and thousands and thousands of names of children who sent these pennies in. So now, when he goes back to his supper club with his wealthy friends, and one of them sarcastically says, "So how did that little fundraiser thing work out for you?" Oh, he can say, "Oh, well, it worked out very well. I got the money we needed, and I got it from children. So thanks for your help." Now, the penny has a lot of significance here. Obviously, they're both made of the same material, much less now than before. The penny's probably about 97% zinc now, and it's just coated in copper. But if you leave it out, it'll turn the same color as a statue. The statue's skin is only slightly thicker than a penny. And if it weren't for pennies, and it weren't for the children that sent in those pennies, we would not have the pedestal we have right now. So from now on, when you look at a penny, make sure you think about that. Thanks for stopping by.